Welcome to Gilroy, California. The roadshow continues for California Edition. My name is Brad Pomerance, and we are joined today by Betty Yee. She is a nominee for Controller of the State of California, currently sits on the Board of Equalization for the state. I'm saying you're a nominee, and it's been a few months since you've been a nominee, but that was in question in June. Let's just say this was the closest election ever in California state history in terms of that second slot?
Yes, absolutely. So remember, this is the first election cycle statewide. We were using the top two primary system, and so yes, it was a very slim margin between the second and third place finisher, and I was just very happy to have 481 votes above my third place finisher.
And I must say, taking nothing away from the former speaker, you slayed the giant. I mean, one could say that he was the Speaker of this state assembly, and you were coming off the BOV. I mean, that's pretty impressive.
Well, I will say I've had this great privilege of representing the board. 21 counties, a quarter of the state, and tremendous support in my district, and I think the 30 years of public finance experience really resonated with voters.
So let's talk about the race since that primary. I know, because I've seen you both before and after the primary. You are everywhere. You are traveling up and down the state. You are talking to Californians. I want to get a sense from you what they're saying to you, and juxtapose that with 4 years ago.
Sure.
Because, like you said, 21 counties, so that 21 of 58. So you have a sense of how Californians are feeling.
I do. So certainly in this Northern California region, the Bay Area, we are feeling that we have really recovered from the recession.
You do.
And so great unemployment numbers. We have robust job growth, high-paying jobs that are being created up here in Northern California, San Francisco, Silicon Valley, and the like. But when you get to other parts of the state, a little bit more sluggish. And Californians feeling hopeful, but still experiencing a lot of drag in the economy, and the jobs are not that plentiful in some parts of the state. So when I look at Imperial County, at the border, I could call that the foundation of California. Still very high unemployment in Imperial County. The Central Valley, the heart of our state, still some improvement, certainly in parts of the Central Valley, but the big issue that we haven't really seen the full effect of is the drought.
And I want to ask you about that. I know the controller is not necessarily involved in the drought.
Well, a bit.
But, I mean, be that as it may, you would be a constitutional officer of the state. So part of the executive team, I guess you can say.
Sure.
And so as you're traveling up and down the state, talking about fiscal health, in the final analysis, if this drought continues, the state's fiscal health will be impacted.
Absolutely.
And it is being impacted this year.
It is. So you look at just the agricultural sector, ag exports, which really has been a hallmark of our economy, that will be severely affected if it's not already. We look at all of the supporting businesses to agriculture, whether it's equipment, machinery,
fertilizer,
all of that,
whatever
it is will all be affected. So you have all these effects that probably won't be fully known for quite some time, but we have to be aware of. And so we have a water bond on the ballot. Now the controller will have some oversight over the expenditure of the bond funds, and so once the legislature appropriates those dollars, we want to be sure that they're getting to the right place.
Polls suggest the water bond will likely pass. I don't know, but that's what the poll suggests. That being said, are voters up and down the state kind of aware of the severity of the drought? Because irony of ironies, Southern California, which you'd think would be most drought impacted, is not this time around.
Right.
And so what are you hearing from voters up and down the state?
I would say that in terms of Los Angeles and the Los Angeles region, people are aware of the drought. They actually are putting conservation practices into place, and there seems to be good compliance with that. In the Central Valley, it's more dire. We are hearing about individual households that are severely affected by the drought to the extent that they may turn on the faucet one day and not have water. So just the severity obviously varies from different parts of the state, but there is, I think, a pretty good awareness of the drought.
When you speak of fiscal health, it's hard to deny that California's fiscal health is improved for a couple of reasons. One, an improving economy. Amen. But it's also hard to deny that Prop 30 did not help that. And Prop 30 did pass a few years ago, over 55% of the vote. But Prop 30 expires, I mean, it's kind of like tomorrow. I mean,
well, it will be
very quick.
It will be an issue in this next term for the legislature and the governor. And
Isn't it 4 years?
It's
Four to
extend out to
seven.
4 to
Right,
7 years,
right.
right, exactly. And so what is interesting is, and I think most heartening, is that we have budget stability in California right now because of Prop 30. Schools are finally seeing some growth in their funding, although not to the levels where they were prior to the cuts. But that is all helpful. And the question for the legislature and the governor will be, do we extend these temporary tax increases because the economy has recovered enough and generating the revenues on its own? Or if we extend it, do we just extend it as is, or are we going to take a look at the underlying tax structure, which is what I hope will happen. And I will lead that discussion.
And we must talk about our tax structure.
Absolutely.
Because you know much better than I that part of the reason why California has struggled over the last 5 years, although bouncing back like you said,
Yes.
is our tax revenues are so volatile because
That's
they
right.
rely so much on capital gains made many right in this
Yes,
Santa Clara
yes,
Valley.
yes.
And so where do we go with that?
Absolutely. So we have another measure on the ballot, Prop 2,
Yes,
which
we
is
do.
the rainy day fund.
Yeah.
The legislature and the governor really want to instill some fiscal discipline with this the volatility of our revenue system, and to essentially sock away some of that revenue into a rainy day fund. Not the reserve, not the
Right.
budget reserve, but a rainy day fund. And this will, certainly as controller, I welcome that tool.
Right.
And have more discipline on that. But really, you can't fix it with just a rainy day fund. You got to go in and look at the structure of the tax system, really figure out how to make it less volatile. And unfortunately, what we're going to have to look at is how do we not have the reliance almost solely on
Right.
those taxpayers who are reliant on stock market related income.
Right. As I understand it, I think 40% of our revenue comes from 1% of Californians.
Just about.
Is that
right?
right?
Yeah, right.
It's around
it's
there.
Right, exactly. High 30s.
Right. I remember a few years ago, was it the Parsky Commission
Yes.
came out
Yes.
with tax reform
Yes.
ideas?
Yes.
The commission's report got shelved.
Yes.
Maybe the timing wasn't great because we were in the recession.
Sure.
And so, assuming our economy continues to chug along nicely, let it be, will there be an appetite? How will you create the appetite
Sure.
for bona fide tax reform? Because the time is right.
Absolutely, and where I want to go with tax reform is we've seen different industries leave the state.
Yeah.
Not necessarily because of the
Right.
tax environment, it could be because of the regulatory environment. So what I would like to do is to convene a diverse array of business interests and taxpayer interests, not your lobbyists, not
Right.
your
Fair
not
enough.
your legislators, but to sit at a table and say, look, we have our stake in the ground in California now. Here's what it's going to take for us to stay here. And it could be taxes, it could be the regulatory environment, it could be the cost of housing, it could be a whole myriad of issues. But we have to come true with what is going on with this economy and where the state government can really help facilitate.
And it's interesting you mentioned taxes versus regulation, because if you really dig into the weeds, and I'm that guy who did that,
Yes, yes.
as I understand it, in terms of tax policy, we really aren't that high of a tax state.
No.
If you consider all
right.
the credits
That's
and
right.
incentives,
That's right.
regulation's an issue. It's hard to deny
Yes.
that we're a high regulatory state.
Yes, and I think for businesses that certainly I've had the opportunity to represent high tech and
Right.
biotech and have had conversations with the ag sector.
Right.
The biggest issue with the regulatory environment is the lack of certainty, the arbitrary nature with which with which regulations are applied.
So what can you do? What can the controller do? What can the legislature do
Sure.
to get a handle? I mean, we hear Governor Brown say, my mission is to revise CEQA, for example,
Right.
California Environmental Quality Act, which, is a landmark piece of legislation, but
Sure.
causes uncertainty.
Sure. Well, certainly as controller, there is not much in terms of the role of the controller.
Sure.
The governor and the legislature, absolutely. I think what is in my purview is the tax arena.
Right.
And so certainty in the tax arena also helps businesses. So we want to be sure that we're creating that and that the rules of the game don't change on them from year to year so that they can plan for the long term.
How do you feel?
I feel good. I feel very good. What a great opportunity it is to travel up and down the state, to have conversations with Californians, and to get a sense of what I'm going to be representing in terms of the entire state.
Did you ever dream?
I-
Betty Yee from San Francisco, did you ever dream?
Well, let me just say this. I am so fortunate. I mean, where else could the daughter of immigrants who spoke no English going into kindergarten be sitting right here as a state constitutional officer candidate?
Her name is Betty Yee. She is a nominee for controller of the great state of California. My name is Brad Pomerance from Gilroy, California. It's California Edition.